Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. Some people don't just break hearts, they bury souls and call it a phase. But then they met you and found out you weren't built like the rest. Let's get something straight. This person has a body count, not in the bedroom, but in the spirit realm. They've walked away from the wreckage of other people's lives like it was nothing. Emotional assassins, psychological butchers, spiritual vampires with a charming smile and a back pocket full of manipulation tactics. Fact. Studies in behavioral psychology show that certain individuals with dark triad traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, are often celebrated in society for their confidence, when in reality they've left a trail of emotional corpses. But see, here's where it all flipped. They pulled the same playbook on you, but the ending hit different. They thought you'd fold like the others, that you'd crumble, lose your mind, or worse, vanish into silence. What they didn't know was that you were spiritually rigged with something ancient, something dangerous, something that doesn't just survive, it responds. And spoiler alert, this wasn't just a failed takedown, it was their last hit. The moment they tried to end you, they triggered something from the other side that doesn't do second chances. So buckle up, because we're not just exposing the attempted hit. We're dragging the whole killer's resume into the light. Oh, and if they're watching this, hey, you messed with the wrong archive of ancient bloodline favor and celestial vengeance. Now grab a seat. Class is in session. Number one, they mastered soul assassination before they ever laid eyes on you. They weren't new to this. This person had a track record of spiritually assassinating people and walking away without a scratch. They'd done this before, more than once. They knew exactly how to spot someone with light and twist that light until it dimmed or died. They knew how to play innocent while dismantling someone's mind, self-worth, and confidence from the inside out. And they did it with pride. You were just supposed to be another easy target, another soul added to their invisible trophy case. But something went wrong. You didn't break. They didn't realize that you were built with a spiritual structure they'd never encountered before. They tried their usual tricks. Love bombing, manipulating, isolating, gaslighting, creating chaos, spreading lies, the whole toolbox. And at first, it may have looked like they were winning. Maybe you even doubted yourself, felt confused, drained, or started to fade into survival mode. But they didn't know what was really happening. Your higher self was watching, quietly documenting everything. They had no idea you were covered in a protection they couldn't see or manipulate. Divine armor doesn't scream, it doesn't boast, and it doesn't warn. It watches. It calculates. It lets the enemy believe they're winning, just long enough to dig their own grave. And that's exactly what this person did. They didn't just misjudge you. They exposed themselves trying to destroy you. They weren't expecting the blowback. They weren't ready for the invisible hit that came back to them when they tried to take you out spiritually. That force hit their life like a wrecking ball. Everything they had built on manipulation started crumbling. And they couldn't trace it back to you because it didn't come from you. It came from the energy they sent. This was the moment they found out the hard way. You weren't just protected, you were dangerous to touch. And anyone who thought they could kill your spirit the way they killed others, they just signed their own spiritual death certificate. Number two, this wasn't jealousy, this was a spiritual hit job. This wasn't about petty jealousy, it wasn't about someone being insecure because you looked good, had talent, or walked in a room and got attention. That would have been too small. No, this was deeper. This person came after you because your presence disrupted something they were spiritually committed to. You were a threat, not to their ego, but to their agenda. You didn't just irritate them. You interfered with the power they had over others. You exposed them without even trying, and that's what made you dangerous to them. This person wasn't just toxic. They were working under spiritual influence, whether they knew it or not. Somewhere along the way, they chose to align with energy that feeds off control, deception, and destruction. They liked being in charge of people's minds. They liked pulling strings. You walked into their life carrying something pure, and it set off alarms in their spirit. They didn't attack because they hated you. They attacked because your light threatened to reveal the darkness they were hiding behind. You didn't even do anything. You didn't expose them, call them out, or drag them publicly. You simply existed with clarity, with peace, with a knowing that couldn't be manipulated, and that drove them mad. You weren't just a person to them. You were a mirror. You were a disruption. You were a walking contradiction to everything they had convinced themselves they could get away with. So no, it wasn't jealousy. This was a spiritual hit. You were targeted because your frequency collided with the false power they built. You were never meant to be in their space. The moment you showed up, you became the problem that had to be eliminated. But what they didn't realize is that trying to take out someone with divine assignment is suicide. They weren't just attacking you. They were crossing into territory marked by a higher authority, and now that they've tried and failed, they know you weren't the weak one, you were the warning. Number 3, they didn't just try to destroy you, they studied you like prey. This person didn't come at you recklessly. They weren't impulsive or sloppy. They were calculated. They didn't just lash out in a random moment of rage. They studied you. They took their time, watched how you moved, picked up on your habits, your insecurities, your triggers. They paid attention to the way you reacted when people disappointed you, when you felt overlooked, when life hit you hard. They weren't observing you out of admiration. They were preparing an attack. They wanted to break you down with precision. That's how they operated. Quiet, patient, strategic, like they'd done it before. And they had. They'd learned how to wear masks so well they convinced everyone around them that they were loving, trustworthy, supportive. They studied the blueprint of your soul so they could quietly dismantle it. They didn't just want to hurt you. They wanted to break the foundation of who you were and make it look like you did it to yourself. But what they didn't see was the part of you they couldn't study. The protected part. The part that didn't move like your trauma. They didn't see the part that was spiritually reserved, guarded by something they had no access to. So while they were playing the long game, trying to wear you down piece by piece, you were watching them too. Not with your eyes, but with your spirit. That's what messed them up. You didn't retaliate, you didn't scream or try to get revenge, you let them keep going. You let them think they had the upper hand. And in doing that, you gave them just enough rope to expose themselves. They thought they were 3 moves ahead. They didn't know you were documenting everything, collecting quiet receipts, letting the truth stack up in the spirit realm where no lie could erase it. By the time they realized you weren't breaking, it was too late. They had already revealed who they were. They had already shown the depth of their darkness. And now, instead of walking away with another soul conquered, they were left choking on their own strategy. Number 4, you were bait from the divine realm. They walked into God's trap. This wasn't a test for you. No, you weren't just another soul being tried and tested in the spiritual arena. This person walked right into something they never saw coming. They thought they were setting a trap, but in reality they were being led straight into one of their own making. You were never just a victim. You were the divine setup. From the moment they decided to attack you, they unknowingly triggered a force that had been waiting for years. It's almost like they were playing checkers while the universe was playing chess. They thought they were the predator, but in reality, they were the prey. Every action they took against you wasn't just counted as an offense. It was a part of a bigger spiritual contract that was waiting to be activated. Their attempt to destroy you wasn't just an attack on your soul. It was an open invitation to judgment that had been silently hovering over their life, waiting for the right moment to fall. Your survival, that was the proof, the evidence. Every time they tried to tear you down, every lie they spread, every attempt to undermine you was weighed. And when you didn't break, when you didn't lose your spirit to their attacks, it was recorded as divine testimony. They thought they were breaking you, but they were only building the case against themselves. Your resilience, your strength, your ability to stand tall in the face of their cruelty became the verdict they couldn't escape. They didn't realize they were playing a game with higher stakes. They were focused on you, trying to bring you to your knees while the universe was watching them. And in the end, their judgment wasn't a matter of your survival, it was a matter of their own choices. The courtroom had been set up long before they even knew your name, and now every move they made against you was sealing their fate. They walked into a divine trap they couldn't get out of. Number 5, they've succeeded before, but you made them hallucinate their own karma. They had done this before, over and over. They'd broken people, shattered minds, crushed spirits, and walked away unscathed. The pattern was predictable. Attack, break, leave a wreckage behind and move on to the next target. People fell under their influence, spiraling into depression, confusion, rage, or worse. Some even lost the will to live, succumbing to the darkness this person had crafted. It was a game to them, a cruel game of power and manipulation, one they'd mastered to perfection. But then they met you. With you, everything changed. You weren't like the others. You didn't collapse under pressure. You didn't crumble when they threw their venomous darts. Instead of breaking, you rose. Instead of fading into the shadows, you stood your ground and reflected their energy right back at them. They had no idea what was happening. The very tactics they used to disarm others had begun to reverse, and the weapon they wielded against you started cutting them instead. What they didn't expect was the mirror you held up to them. You didn't need to fight them with words or retaliation. All you had to do was stand firm and be who you truly were. That's when the shift happened. They began seeing their own darkness reflected back in you. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment they tried to twist your mind or steal your peace, it came back to them in waves, and it drove them mad. The weight of their actions was no longer a distant consequence. They could feel it now, seeping into their own soul, eating away at them. The very forces they had once used to control, to break, and to enslave others were now spiraling back, turning against them. They thought they had power, but in reality they had only built their own cage, and now they were trapped inside it, hallucinating their own karma as it consumed them from the inside out. You weren't just a victim, you were the mirror that shattered their illusion of control. Number 6, they underestimated your bloodline. They thought you were just nice. They underestimated you in ways they couldn't even comprehend. To them, you were just another nice person, a bit too kind, maybe a little too trusting, too willing to give others the benefit of the doubt. They thought they could use that against you. After all, how dangerous could someone who's always trying to help others really be? But what they didn't see was that your niceness was just the surface. Beneath that gentle exterior lay the strength of a bloodline that had been tested through centuries of war, survival, and divine favor. You weren't just strong in the way they thought. You weren't just the kind of person who could bounce back from hardship. You were spiritually commissioned. You were carrying the weight of generations that had fought and died for this very moment. Your ancestors weren't just watching from some distant past. Their power was alive in you. It was active, pulsing through your veins, waiting for the right time to awaken. And when they tried to tear you apart, they unknowingly stepped into something far bigger than their petty schemes. This wasn't just a personal conflict between you and them, it was ancestral warfare. The moment they tried to break you, they crossed into a territory that had been fiercely guarded by your lineage. And they didn't even know they were walking into a spiritual minefield. Every step they took towards you triggered a response that echoed through the ages, forces that they couldn't even see, let alone fight. They thought they were up against just you. But what they didn't realize was that they were facing a legacy of warriors, bound by blood and spiritual destiny. They had no idea that your survival wasn't just a matter of your own strength. It was the fulfillment of a mission your ancestors had fought for. You were not just standing there alone in the face of their attack. You were standing on the shoulders of giants who had lived, died, and fought for you to be exactly where you were. And now, they had to reckon with all of it. This wasn't just about them versus you. It was them versus a whole dynasty that had been prepared for this very battle. And no, they didn't stand a chance. Number 7, they saw your light, but didn't realize it had teeth. They saw your light from a distance, and they couldn't resist. There was something magnetic about you, something that pulled them in, making them think they could get close, bask in it, and maybe even steal a piece of it for themselves. It was the kind of light that made them feel alive, seen, maybe even powerful. They were drawn to you, like a moth to a flame, lured in by the warmth and radiance of what you carried. But what they didn't realize was that the light they were drawn to wasn't just some gentle, comforting glow. It wasn't the kind of light that would wrap them in a soft embrace and soothe their wounds. No, this light had teeth. They expected warmth. They expected something they could handle, something they could manipulate or control. What they got instead was a furnace, unrelenting, refining, and purifying. They thought they were stepping into a space of comfort and ease, but in reality, they were walking into the heart of a force that doesn't just survive, it transforms, it cleanses, and it destroys anything that doesn't belong. This wasn't some soft, passive light. This was the kind of energy that burns away all impurities, that reveals every hidden darkness, and exposes everything for what it truly is. You weren't a beacon that begged to be admired. You were a force that demanded respect. When they tried to get close, they realized too late that your light wasn't there to make them feel comfortable. It was there to burn away every illusion they'd built around themselves, to purify their intentions, and to tear down the walls of deception they'd hidden behind. You weren't just a source of warmth, you were a fire, the kind that doesn't flicker out when it's challenged, the kind that doesn't simply light the way. It clears the path by turning everything in its way to ash. And when they tried to get too close, expecting a harmless glow, they found out the hard way. Your light wasn't for them, it was for the ones who could stand the heat. And anyone who wasn't willing to face the flames, they were consumed by it. Number 8. This person was a destroyer of destinies, until they crashed into yours. This person had made a name for themselves as a destroyer of destinies. They had perfected the art of dismantling dreams, of taking souls who were just beginning to rise and tearing them down before they could ever realize their full potential. It was like clockwork for them, manipulating, controlling, and exploiting the weaknesses of others. They'd built their power by playing puppeteer to the fragile, the lost, the easily influenced. But when they decided to target you, to hijack your calling, they unknowingly stepped into something they could never control. You weren't like the others. They thought they could bend you to their will, that they could cloud your mind with their lies, redirect your path with their manipulation, and take ownership of the very destiny that was designed for you. But they didn't realize that your life wasn't just yours. It was divinely mapped out, protected and sealed by forces they couldn't even fathom. The moment they attempted to play with your purpose, they crossed a line they had no business crossing. What they touched wasn't just you, it was sacred ground, a space that was guarded by divine authority. Their attack wasn't a simple miscalculation, it was a spiritual trespass. And just like that, they triggered the kind of consequences they could never have predicted. The curse they tried to send your way didn't land where they intended. No, it came with GPS, tracking its every move, and it returned to sender with a force they couldn't outrun. The very darkness they tried to cast on you was now locked onto them, a karmic tracker that would follow them until the debt was paid. They thought they were in control. They thought they could pull the strings. But the moment they tried to interfere with your divine purpose, they sealed their fate. The destruction they meant for you became the destruction they were walking into themselves. What they sent out into the universe wasn't just a curse, it was a boomerang. And it was coming back at them faster than they could comprehend. And no matter how much they tried to escape it, it was already too late. They had disturbed forces that had no intention of letting them go. Number 9. They confused spiritual dominance with control and got spiritually dismembered. They thought power was all about control, bending others to their will, dominating, making every move calculated to enforce their authority. To them, strength was measured by how much they could manipulate, how much they could force the world around them to bow to their desires, and for a while they believed they were untouchable, that their ability to dictate the lives of others was the truest form of power. But they never understood what real power looked like until they met you. You didn't need to control anyone to command respect. While they were busy trying to dominate every situation, to flex their so-called power over others, you were practicing restraint. You didn't have to yell, manipulate, or force things into place. You knew the strength of silence, the strength of patience, and the strength of moving with precision. You didn't act out of impulse or emotion. You acted from a place of wisdom, from a cosmic understanding of how things truly work. You understood that control is just an illusion for the weak, and that real power comes from the ability to stay grounded, focused, and aligned with a higher purpose. While they were pushing, trying to bend the world in their direction, you were navigating it with purpose. You didn't let their chaos pull you into their game. You moved with the kind of grace that outclassed them at every turn. They could never predict your next move because it wasn't driven by ego, insecurity, or fear. It was driven by something far more powerful: cosmic order. You didn't have to fight or struggle to prove your worth. The universe already knew where you stood. So while they spent all their energy trying to control and dominate, you silently dismantled everything they thought they knew about power. You outclassed them in every sense. They confused dominance with power, and in doing so, they opened themselves up to being spiritually dismembered. The more they tried to control, the more they revealed their weakness. Meanwhile, you stood firm, anchored in a strength they would never understand, letting their own actions lead to their downfall. Number 10, you didn't just beat them, you exposed them to themselves. You didn't just defeat them in the way they expected. You shattered their entire sense of self. They thought the battle was about power, about winning, about coming out on top. But what they failed to realize was that you weren't playing by their rules. You didn't need to fight fire with fire. Instead, you held up a mirror to them, a reflection of their own soul. And in that reflection, they saw everything they tried to hide, everything they pretended didn't exist. The most painful part wasn't that you escaped their grip. It wasn't even that you survived their attacks. No, the real pain came from seeing their own emptiness staring back at them through you. You didn't retaliate with anger or bitterness. You didn't stoop to their level. You simply reflected them, their insecurities, their lies, their cruelty. You exposed them for who they truly were without ever lifting a finger in violence. You didn't have to destroy them. You just revealed them for what they were all along. And that revelation broke them in a way nothing else could. They could handle the physical assaults, the emotional manipulation, even the loss of control. But facing the truth of their own soul, that was a punishment far worse than any revenge. In the mirror you held up to them, they saw the void, where their authenticity should have been, the emptiness of their heart that they had tried to fill with power, control, and manipulation. They couldn't run from it, couldn't deny it, and it shattered them more deeply than any external consequence could have. While they were busy trying to destroy you, they had no idea that their own destruction was already in motion. They thought they were winning, but all they did was expose themselves, and the reality of their own fractured spirit left them broken in ways they could never heal. The mirror you held didn't need to reflect anything but the truth, and that truth was the only thing they couldn't escape. Number 11, they weren't ready for your spiritual backup, but it was never quiet. They thought you were vulnerable, isolated, easy to manipulate, just one person against the world, but they had no idea what was really happening behind the scenes. To them, it seemed like you were walking alone, like you were fighting their battles with nothing but your own strength. What they didn't realize was that you weren't alone at all. You had spiritual backup, an army that was always standing just out of sight, and it was never as quiet as they thought. Every time they sent a curse your way, every time they plotted to break you or twist your mind, they didn't hear silence. They heard footsteps, soft but unmistakable. It was your spiritual support, moving with purpose, intercepting their every attack and preventing their schemes from ever fully taking root. They thought it was paranoia. They called you too sensitive, too cautious, or maybe even crazy when they felt the interference. But in reality, it was your angels, your divine protectors, filing cases against them in realms they could never reach, aligning everything in your favor and blocking the effects of their malicious intentions. Each time they tried to manipulate you or push you into a corner, something would stop them. A door that should have been open would close. A path that seemed clear would suddenly become impassable. They didn't understand why their efforts kept failing. They couldn't comprehend how their plans were always being foiled, how the universe seemed to bend in your favor. They thought you were lucky, or perhaps just lucky enough to dodge their schemes, but the truth was far greater than mere fortune. You weren't dodging their attacks by chance. It was divine intervention, a spiritual defense mechanism working overtime on your behalf. And while they were busy calling it paranoia, what they couldn't see was that every interference, every unexpected turn of events, was the universe making sure they couldn't get to you. You weren't fighting this war alone. You had celestial forces on your side, watching, listening, and actively working to turn their curses into their own downfall. And that they would never see coming. Number 12. You didn't just survive, you collapsed a demonic infrastructure. You didn't just survive their attacks, you shook the very foundation of the dark forces they were connected to. This person wasn't just an individual, they were a node in a much larger network, a part of a destructive system designed to break people, manipulate them, and maintain control through fear and chaos. They thought they had the upper hand, that breaking you would be just another piece in their carefully crafted web of destruction. But what they didn't anticipate was that you weren't just a target. You were a force of resistance that, when they couldn't break you, collapsed the entire infrastructure they were part of. The moment you withstood their attacks, it wasn't just a win for you, it was a shockwave that resonated throughout the entire system they operated in. They were a small cog in a massive wheel, but when they failed to break you, the gears of that machine stopped turning. Your spiritual resistance acted like an earthquake, shaking the very core of the dark web they were connected to. Every step you took towards healing, every moment you refused to fall, reverberated throughout the network they had helped build. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about everything they represented. By refusing to be broken, you set off a chain reaction that weakened and dismantled the destructive force they were a part of. Your victory didn't just make a difference in your life. It disrupted the balance they relied on to keep others trapped. Your strength was like a crack in the dam, one that grew wider with every battle you won until the whole structure came tumbling down. They may have been a key player in that system, but the moment they failed with you, they exposed the vulnerability at the heart of the network. It wasn't just your survival that mattered, it was what your survival represented. By enduring, you sent a message to the entire infrastructure: this can be broken. And that, more than anything, terrified them. Your resistance became a battle cry that reverberated through realms they never thought they could be touched in. Your victory was seismic, and its ripple effect was felt far beyond what they could ever comprehend. Number 13. They left bodies behind them, but yours stood up and looked back. They had left a trail of devastation behind them. Broken people, shattered spirits, lives wrecked by their manipulations. For everyone else, it was a one-way road to destruction. They were used to seeing the aftermath. The wreckage of souls who never had the strength to rise again. They thought they had a formula, a power that ensured their victims would remain on their knees, defeated and crushed. But when they left you for dead, something they didn't plan for happened. You didn't just survive, you reawakened. When you stood up, it wasn't just about picking yourself off the ground, it was about rediscovering the strength you had all along, the power that had always been hidden beneath the surface. And when you looked back at them, with that unwavering, unshaken gaze, it was more than just a moment of confrontation. It was a revelation. You had risen, not as a shadow of the person you once were, but as something new, something unbreakable. And in that gaze, they saw something they hadn't expected, the very thing they tried to destroy, staring back at them with defiance and strength. They were used to people crumbling, fading into the background, too broken to ever face them again. But with you, they saw the impossible. They saw someone who had been torn apart, yet refused to be lost in the rubble. Your resilience, your rise, shattered their delusion of control. They had thought they held all the cards, that they could wield their power to ensure that no one could ever stand after them, but you proved them wrong. You didn't just bounce back, you came back stronger, and now they can't escape you. You don't just haunt them in the way an old memory lingers, you haunt them in a way they can't shake off. The sight of you, the thought of you standing tall and unbroken, eats away at their sense of invincibility. You are their living nightmare, a constant reminder that no matter how much destruction they sow, some things can never be fully destroyed. You're not just a survivor anymore. You are the very thing they never counted on. And now they live in fear of the day when you come to collect. Number 14, their last attempt on you sealed their spiritual fate. The last attempt they made on you wasn't just another move in their game, it was the moment they sealed their own spiritual fate. They thought it was just one final push, Another attempt to break you, to bend you to their will, to make you crumble like everyone else they had destroyed. But in reality, it was their final mistake. That last hit wasn't an attack on you, it was a stamp of approval on their own destruction. They had crossed a line, one that the divine had been quietly observing for years. They thought they were above consequences, above judgment, that their manipulation and cruelty could go unchecked forever. But what they didn't realize is that the universe had been tracking every move they made, every person they hurt, every soul they tried to break. The divine was patient, waiting for the right moment, watching the balance shift, knowing that their time was running out. And when they launched that final strike against you, it wasn't just an attack. It was a trigger, a cosmic signal that their fate was now sealed. Your survival became the receipt for their downfall. While they believed they were executing the perfect plan to finish you off, they didn't see the spiritual ledger being marked in your favor. Your resilience, your ability to rise again, was the proof that the universe had been on your side all along. You didn't just survive, you were the living testimony that the divine had been watching, that there were greater forces at play than they could ever understand. And their collapse? It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. That final act, that last attempt to destroy you, had been the final straw. It was now scheduled and sanctioned by the very powers they thought they could control. What they had put into motion for you would now come back to haunt them, and nothing could stop it. What they never realized is that they weren't just fighting you. They were fighting the universe itself, and when that final blow came, it wasn't just their defeat, it was their divine judgment. In the end, they couldn't fathom the magnitude of their own destruction. Every attack, every manipulation, every strike they took at you only set the stage for their own downfall. They thought they were the ones pulling the strings, the ones in control. But they never understood the depth of the divine plan that was unfolding. The moment they chose to take you down, they unknowingly signed their own spiritual fate. And now, as they sit in the consequences of their actions, they will realize it was never about you being broken. It was always about them breaking themselves. Your survival wasn't just a victory. It was an act of cosmic justice. You were never truly alone in your battle. The universe, your ancestors, and every force of good stood with you, moving in ways they couldn't even begin to comprehend. And the more they pushed, the closer they drew to the moment of reckoning. They tried to manipulate, destroy, and control, but in the end, it was their own darkness they couldn't escape. You didn't just survive, you outlasted, you transcended, and you exposed them for the hollow, broken forces they truly were. Now, as they watch their world crumble, they'll see that the war was never about them winning. It was always about them being exposed, about their own actions catching up to them in ways they never imagined. Their collapse wasn't a fluke, it was inevitable. And when the dust settles, the only thing they'll be left with is the realization that they were never as powerful as they thought. You are the proof that light cannot be extinguished, no matter how hard the darkness tries. Your story isn't just one of survival, it's one of divine reclamation, of balance restored. So let them watch, let them crumble, because in the end, the universe has already decided who the true victor is, and that victory is yours. If this resonated with you, if you felt the power of your own resilience in these words, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join the movement of those who refuse to be broken, those who rise above every attack and come out stronger. Like this video if you're ready to embrace your own divine strength and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Drop a comment below. Let me know how you faced your own battles and what victory means to you. Your story could be the spark someone else needs to reclaim their power. And as always, don't just watch, share the wisdom, because together we can shatter the illusion of control, awaken the truth, and rise. Make sure you hit the bell icon so you never miss a powerful update. Stay strong, stay relentless, and remember, your victory is already written.